Shunned by the good people of Arkham and Essex County, Innsmouth doesn't get many visitors these days. The place once was a thriving seaport on the Massachusetts coast, but that was before a dark shadow fell and cursed the town and its people. As a keeper, should you be chomping at the bit to transport your players to the damned and decrepit port town found inside Call of Cthulhu Innsmouth? Well, you're going to find out because I'll be sharing my review right after this. Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I'll be sharing my review of the upcoming Call of Cthulhu Innsmouth from Chaosium Inc. Written by Mike Mason with Sean Branney, Andrew Lamont, Kevin Ross, and Keith Herber. I apologize if I've mispronounced any of those names. This 270-page hardcover will be landing in stores on July 22nd, carrying an MSRP of $59.99. I also expect the PDF to be available on that same date, probably for about $29.99. Having said that, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got Call of Cthulhu Innsmouth. A few things to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, my friends over at Chaosium Inc. were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. It's very important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a really good feel for what you're going to find inside. Then lastly, this is a keeper-facing book, so if you're a player, keep in mind that there are going to be some spoilers ahead, especially as I flip through the book. I guarantee you're going to see some things which will ruin surprises of this locale. So I'm just letting you know that right up front. Now, of course, if your keeper has been talking about maybe picking this up, let them know about this review. That way they can approach Call of Cthulhu Innsmouth and make a far more informed buying decision. Now, before we dive on into the book, I do want to share a look at three of the inserts that come with this. First off, we get the Innsmouth Courier, which is a facsimile of a newspaper. Now, this is not contemporary. The default timeline for this book is 1922, although there is information about setting adventures and campaigns in different times. But this is more a clue that the investigators can come across. This is supposed to be a newspaper from the 1840s. Then we have what is essentially a player-facing map. So we've got a town directory here. Even have some advertisements on it. And then on the back, we've got a map of Innsmouth and its surrounding outskirts. And then we have essentially a keeper-facing map, which is also keyed, but keyed differently than the player-facing map. And then we get the outskirts and Innsmouth itself. Paper stock on these is very nice. All right, let's dive on in. First thing we're going to do is take a peek at the credits page. A lot of folks worked very hard to bring this to life. So let's give credit where credit is due. Should also mention, some of the material that you're going to find inside this has appeared previously, although there's been a lot of revision for it. And of course, there is tons of new content in this book. But if you have been a keeper for a long time, probably going to recognize some of this as being somewhatly familiar. Now, granted, this builds upon the first two editions of Escape from Innsmouth. The first edition came out in 1992. So, like I said, if you have been a keeper for a long time, you might recognize some aspects of this book. But if you haven't been a keeper for that long, this is all going to be brand new content for you. Now, of course, there are some things that have appeared in other books as well, but I would say at least 90%, maybe 85, 90% of this I had not seen previously, and the rest has been revised quite a bit. So we're going to start off with an introduction. It's going to talk about the story, Shadow over Innsmouth, a little bit of a discussion about that, and then we're going to actually dive on into an overview of the port town, starting with its history, its founding, what it was like prior to the dark pact that was made with the Deep Ones, and of course, what has happened since, as well as the forming of the esoteric Order of Dagon. We get some information about weather and travel distances. We get some brief overviews of various different places in Miskatonic Valley. And then we will dive on into some of the nitty gritty about Innsmouth. And we'll also get a lot of information, a lot of background about Deep Ones. And one of the things that I love about this book is, in a lot of ways, this is set up for you and your players to make Innsmouth your own. So, of course, you can go with the default where the Deep Ones are evil and they're just working to bring about the return of Great Cthulhu. And by doing that, they're also going to be able to take dominion over the planet. But it's not set in stone. In fact, a lot of things throughout this book, you'll have multiple options how you can utilize it, such as NPCs. You'll have some NPCs where their entry will say, well, you know, you can play them as this sort of character, but you can also play them as that sort of character. I love that. I think that's great. Nothing is necessarily set in stone. So if you want the Deep Ones in your campaign or one shot to simply not want to have anything to do with anybody, they just want to be left alone, but maybe they're stuck having to breed with humans out of necessity, that is entirely possible. But the default for the book is that the Deep Ones are evil. The hybrids in Innsmouth, for the most part, are evil. Like I said, that is the default. Then we'll get into a section discussing Innsmouth itself and how the investigators will go about doing different things in Innsmouth. Where can you find certain details about certain things? And where's the library and so forth? We do get some new skills, as well as an altered skill, which is Navigate Innsmouth. New skill, we've got the lore for Innsmouth, and we also have Reassure, which is kind of a lightweight psychoanalysis skill. We get into information about clubs and societies, information. We get some info, too, about some of the small towns that surround Innsmouth. Not a ton of detail, but we do get some. Then we're going to dive on into our guide to Innsmouth. And this is where we're going to find the various different neighborhoods. We're going to find a lot of adventure seeds. We're going to find out information about a lot of the various different NPCs, what their agendas might be, what factions we have at play. One other aspect I think is great as far as this book are the NPC portraits. They are excellent. As far as the artwork throughout, it's very, very solid. There are a few images where I'm sort of like, okay, so this is a horror role-playing game. It's not too spooky, but it's not a big deal. I mean, most of the artwork is pretty creepy. And of course, like I said, these NPC portraits are excellent. And the PDF should also have an additional download for the various different NPC portraits too. So if you're like me and when you're running Call of Cthulhu, you tend to have a small tablet on hand so you can share different images, different clues, handouts, things like that. I tend to share NPC portraits that way. So as I said, you're going to get information about each of the neighborhoods and places of interest. And something else I think is really nicely done throughout this book is it's not only focused on the taint in Innsmouth, the dark pact with the deep ones. There are a lot of other weird goings on in Innsmouth. Now, there are no adventures contained inside this book. So I'm sure some keepers out there will be thinking, well, I'd love to use Innsmouth as a campaign location, but how am I going to bring my players into it? Now, as I pointed out, there are a half a dozen different kind of adventure seeds, adventure nuggets. They're a little more in depth than what I would consider an adventure seed. But we still don't have a full-fledged adventure in this book. So what I would recommend is take a look at the hundreds of Call of Cthulhu adventures that have already been published. A vast number of them begin with the investigators being contacted by an old friend or an acquaintance or somebody who's heard about their exploits who need them to look into some strange goings on. Well, easily enough, just transport that adventure into Innsmouth. Easy enough. And like I said, there are hundreds of previously published Call of Cthulhu adventures that you could easily slot into this location. As far as production quality, paper stock, very solid. I already talked about the artwork. This does have a stitched binding. This is a book that's going to hold up really nicely to repeated use at your game table. And as you can see, there is lots and lots of content here. Oh, man. Yes, we do get some floor plans for different important locations. Like I said, there's a ton going on here that really don't involve the deep ones per se. We even get information about the deep one's city that's located out by Devil Reef. So that is a location that we get details about. Here are those seeds as far as the adventures go. Like I said, we got a half dozen of those. Then we'll get into some play aids. We get some new stat blocks, some artifacts, deep one jewelry and such. Really, really well done. We'll finish up with a very in-depth index. Definitely appreciate that, as well as a few handouts. So that is a peek inside Call of Cthulhu Innsmouth, arriving in stores on July 22nd. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. Once again, production quality really, really nicely done. I have one minor quibble, and it's simply that some of the artwork is just kind of like, oh, okay. So that's a place in Innsmouth. Oh, it's a place in Arkham. It's a place in some neighboring town. Not very creepy, not very spooky, but that's okay. It's just a handful of images. So a very, very minor critique there. The paper stock, very solid. It's got a stitched binding. This book is going to hold up to a lot of use at your game table. So very well done there also. As far as the book itself, it is absolutely chock full of useful information for keepers interested in setting adventures or campaigns in the classic Lovecraft seaport of Innsmouth. There are a lot of things I really, really dig about this book that really, to me, stand out. And one of the biggest is the fact that my Innsmouth setting is probably going to be different than your Innsmouth setting, even if we're both looking at sticking with the default, where the deep ones are evil and they're looking to bring about the return of Great Cthulhu. There are so many different options and variations that you can utilize as a keeper to really make Innsmouth yours and your players and make it stand out as being very, very unique. There are a lot of options in here to make Innsmouth different than what you would associate with the Lovecraft story. So if you've got players out there who are Lovecraft experts, you can throw them for a loop with a few different options that are available in this source book. Also got to point out, I love the fact that we've got a lot of different NPCs who can be role played in different ways. It's sort of like, oh, here's information here. You might want to use this character in this way, or maybe use this character in that way. Once again, very little is absolutely set in stone in this source book. I love that. I got to say, when I see Mike Mason as the lead writer or designer on a Call of Cthulhu release, I know as a keeper, I'm in good hands. I can sit back and I know I am going to dig that book, whatever that release is, whatever its topic. So I have got to say, if you're a keeper and you have any inclination whatsoever in placing adventures or campaigns in Lovecraft's classic seaport of Innsmouth, Call of Cthulhu Innsmouth is an absolute must own. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give Call of Cthulhu Innsmouth from Chaosium Inc. the rarefied 10 out of 10. All right, that is it for this time out. If you enjoy the Gaming Gang and would like to support the outlet, you can do so in a few ways. First, by utilizing our affiliate links to the One Bookshelf sites, such as DriveThruRPG. To do so, simply visit thegaminggang.com, click on one of our banners. That way, if you happen to make a purchase, I get a 5% commission on most sales. And all those commissions really do add up. Help keep thegaminggang.com around. You can also make a one-time donation by way of PayPal, or even become a monthly member of our Patreon. You'll find all the information about those down in the show notes. Also in those show notes, you're going to find an invite link to our Discord server. It's absolutely free to sign up, so be sure to hang with the gang over on Discord. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. And if you ring the bell, please select all notifications, because that way you'll not only be informed when I share videos such as this review, you'll also be notified when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central, as I bring you the latest in tabletop role-playing game news and more. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for our latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are never going to see on this channel. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and until I see you next time, certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.